Good evening and welcome to Scotland at 7 here on Broadcasting Scotland. My name's Kenny McBride and I'm joined this evening by two excellent guests. Firstly, one of our regular guests, writer and academic Effie Samara. Effie, how are you doing this evening?
I'm good, thank you, Kenny.
Excellent. And on the other side, a new guest. This is Tom Will, who is a tidal energy engineer and the SNP candidate for Shetland in next year's election. Tom, how are you doing?
Yeah, doing good. Not the best day up here in Shetland, horizontal rain, but otherwise well.
Well, you'll survive for an hour with us, I'm sure. We start this evening, as we always do, with our coronavirus statistics update. So as of 2 p.m. today, a total of 908,968 people in Scotland have been tested through NHS Scotland labs and UK government regional testing centres. Of these, 859,804 were confirmed negative, 49,164 were positive. There were 1,456 new confirmed cases of COVID-19 in Scotland today. And sadly, there were also 15 new reported deaths. This will, of course, be an underestimate of the total number of cases, as not everyone with the virus will display symptoms and not all those with symptoms will be tested. Of the people who have tested positive, 824 people were in hospital last night, 69 of whom were in intensive care. The number of patients in Scotland who have died from complications caused by the coronavirus infection now stands at 2,625. This number only includes those who have died in hospital having received a positive test for the virus. The latest UK daily figures available show that 43,967 patients who tested positive for COVID-19 have sadly died from their illness, an increase of 241 since yesterday. This number refers to deaths in all settings, not just those in hospitals. And we also have the weekly analysis by the Office for National Statistics for the week ending 9th of October, which was week 41 of the year. In that week, there were 438 deaths registered related to the novel coronavirus, which is an increase of 117 from the previous week. 37 of these deaths occurred in Wales, an increase of 12 from the previous week, with the other 401 occurring in England. 387 of these deaths across England and Wales had previously been reported in the UK's daily reporting. Although COVID-19 accounts for 4.4% of all deaths in England and Wales for the week, the overall death rate was only 1.5% above the 5-year average. Once again, deaths in hospitals and care homes were well below average, while deaths in private homes were significantly higher than in a normal year. And just before we go on to the rest of this evening's stories, if you'd like to join the conversation here, you can do so on Twitter by following us at Broadcast Scot and using the hashtag Scotland at 7. That's hashtag Scotland AT and the number 7. And as you can see, we will be flashing some of those tweets up on the screen throughout the show. So do please join us. In our first story tonight, National Clinical Director Professor Jason Leach is urging those with coronavirus symptoms to book a test immediately and self-isolate in order to protect themselves and others. YouGov polling suggests that the vast majority of people would book a test and self-isolate right away if they have symptoms of COVID-19. But nearly 1 in 5 people say they would wait a day or two to see whether they get better or develop further symptoms before booking a test. Professor Leach said, "We know that most people say they would follow the guidance to protect themselves and others by booking a test and self-isolating as soon as they develop any of the symptoms of COVID-19. However, 18% of people asked said that they would wait to see whether they got better or developed more symptoms. It is crucial that people who think they may have the virus do not delay in booking a test and self-isolate right away. We have an enhanced test and protect system in place, but the longer people who may have symptoms delay in taking these two vital actions, the less effective it can be. It's important that all of us are vigilant for the symptoms of COVID-19 and understand what actions we should take if someone develops them." So Tom, I'll come to you first. This is fairly obvious advice. Why do you think there's something like 1 in 5 people in Scotland who are not taking the advice quite as seriously as they should?
I think it's probably a case of nobody thinking it could happen to them, A lot of people, very few people actually know firsthand still, as a proportion of the population, somebody who's had it. So I think people are probably yeah, that's probably just a sort of it won't happen to me thing. But it's obviously crucial that anyone who does have symptoms just err on the side of caution. You don't have much to lose. And we're not in an ordinary situation right now. So
Now, obviously, the islands generally have had slightly better pandemics than most of the mainland. I wonder, is there more or less skepticism, do you think, in Shetland than in the rest of Scotland about these regulations and about the pandemic in general?
yeah, I mean, it's interesting because we had the highest number of cases per head of population at the outset back in March. But since then, it's been a really effective set of restrictions. And yeah, we're now in a fortunate position where we've got some of the lowest case numbers. And there's a big debate going on at the moment about whether more localized restrictions sense. And certainly I can absolutely understand when the case levels are so low here in Shetland, why people would want that. It's interesting listening to Jason Leach and Michael Dixon, the head of NHS Shetland, just saying that, again, we need to err on the side of caution here. And yes, there is a case to be made for loosening restrictions in Shetland, but if we were to get an outbreak and we have loosened restrictions, that's just going to make it spread all the faster. But I think as this pandemic on, then increasingly it's going to make sense as we get better data and a better understanding of how the virus is operating to have localized restrictions. But yeah, I absolutely understand that people are wanting to take it step by step and play it cautious.
And I mean, obviously, with being geographically separated from the rest of Scotland, it would be theoretically possible to have some sort of quarantine for people arriving in Shetland. Do you think that that's something that people would accept if that was the best way to keep Shetland COVID free?
Yeah, that's certainly what's being talked about. And, we've got our neighbours in Faroe. We're closer to Faroe than we are to Edinburgh, so and they've managed quite effectively to do just that. But obviously, Faroe Islands have their own health service, and we're not in the same position. There aren't many pandemic specialists in Shetland, so we're kind of we're sort of, there's a lot of people very envious done. We have to work with the systems we've got. But I said quite clearly that she is open to most restrictions, and I wouldn't be surprised to see that happening as things progress.
Okay. Well, I'll turn to Effie now. And Effie, it's very frustrating, isn't it, to hear that as many as, almost 1 in 5 people are not willing to just put themselves away for 2 weeks. But there is also this problem of people perhaps risking an income or potentially even risking a job if they do have to self-isolate. Is this maybe a function of the fact that the support that is available to people isn't quite as good as it could have been?
Absolutely. And I would say this is probably the paramount reason why people, and I will echo what Tom just said about people thinking, well, maybe it's just a cold or whatever, and I'll get it checked tomorrow. But if you are in this precarious situation where you depend on your daily income, literally to go out there and do that, and that could be imperiled by possibly you having to isolate for 2 weeks. That is a source of great fear, especially if you have a family to support, if you have children to support. So, I'm just going to go back to moaning a little bit about the UK government and say this is one of the most powerful countries in the world at the end of the day, and they could do a lot better than what they're doing just now. And obviously, we're going to talk about Manchester in a minute, and that's reflected in that situation. But I would say probably this is what would, at least if I were in a very precarious situation, my very first concern would be to ensure that my child is fed. And I would forget about even my own health and other people. So it's a natural instinct that people have to protect their families, and money is right up there.
Mm-hmm. And as far as this message coming from Jason Leach and from every part of the public health infrastructure, that people should be booking a test as quickly as possible, that they should be self-isolating right away. Do you think that that message will eventually get through to these other people who aren't taking the guidance as seriously as they might, compared to the 69% who say they are following the rules?
The thing about public messaging, science tells us that obviously repetition is key. So there is a reason why he keeps on repeating it, and clearly it does get through. And as we progress through the winter, if God is willing, as they say, hopefully it won't get much worse. I think it's common knowledge that it is possible that this winter we could be faced with a major crisis. But people absolutely they need to do this. This is about their health. This is about the health of their families and those they love and the wider community. But yeah, repetition is important. And let's not forget that Scotland has been great through this pandemic. We've complied. We've done great, and even given the restricted abilities and competencies that the government has under the UK umbrella. So my own experience of this is through a friend of my daughter's, a young girl who mum thought she had symptoms a couple of months ago. They booked a test. The results came back negative within about 10 hours, I think. So in my knowledge, the system works very, very well. It is limited knowledge, obviously, but whoever's listening to us just now, don't risk it. Get out there, get tested.
Yeah. I was just about to say, if you are showing symptoms, those are a new persistent cough, a fever or a high temperature, and a loss or change in your sense of smell or taste, then please do book a test as quickly as you can. You can find that online, or you can phone 0800 028 2816. That's 0800 028 2816 to book a test. Please remember, you're not just doing it for yourself, you're doing it for all of us. But we move on now. And a leaked document has revealed that the Tory government is in full panic mode over Scottish independence, as it becomes ever more desperate in its attempt to deny people in Scotland the right to choose their own future. A memo seen by Bloomberg News has revealed that a consultancy firm close to the Tory party has advised UK government figures, including Michael Gove, on tactics to delay or avoid a referendum and how to placate rising support for Scottish independence. Poll after poll has shown independence is now backed by a majority of Scots, with a recent Ipsos Mori poll conducted for STV revealing that of those expressing a view, 58% of people would vote yes in a future independence referendum. So, Tom, I don't know if you caught much of the content of this memo that was supposedly put out, this new strategy for the Tories, but very little of it seems to be involved in actually persuading people to support the union. The vast majority of it seems to be about convincing or finding ways to avoid actually having a vote on the issue. What do you make of that?
Yeah, no, I've read the Bloomberg piece, and I think you're absolutely right. I think it shows that we're winning the argument and they've run out of arguments. They're seeking to kind of subvert the democratic process, and there's not really any positive case for the union in there. So you can understand why they've done it, but it's obviously must be deeply embarrassing for them to have this come out. And I think we need to be hyper vigilant about any attempt to delay or avoid a referendum when there's rising support for it across the country, even in Shetland, which voted no last time. There's a lot of for example, lifelong Liberal voters who are just horrified by the direction that the UK is going in. And at this crucial time with support for independence, you can understand why the other side's panicking, but we just need to be hyper vigilant and keep on pressing for that independence referendum, the right question in it, and get the right answer.
Now, one of the kind of strategies that was proposed there was this idea of offering a straight yes/no referendum on some set of new powers, something like the Devo Max option that we were supposedly being offered last time around. Do you think something like that could potentially head off support for independence, or do you think that that would just anger people even more and perhaps increase support for independence?
Yeah, I think the latter really. I mean, there's an established process for organising and setting the question for an independence referendum, and it's done through Holyrood. So I think people in Scotland wait through any attempt to rig that, and even the prospect of it actually does our cause more favours than theirs.
And you mentioned the change in support in Shetland. Obviously, here at Broadcasting Scotland, we've got a terrible central belt West Coast bias. So, what are things like in Shetland? How has the mood changed up there?
Yeah, I mean, I keep saying to people, we've still got a lot of work to do. I don't know. I wouldn't like to guess what the percentage would be if we were to have the referendum again. I think Shetland's obviously been liberal for about 70 years. A lot of these liberal voters are, fair-minded people. They want to see a fairer society. There's maybe historically been a bit of an element of Shetland seeing itself as, to some extent, outside politics. But I think with you know, Brexit Britain coming down the line, people can see that actually, we're going to be influenced by this trend as much as this event or crisis as much as anyone else. And I think, I've anecdotally, just from speaking to the small number of people that I'm able to with the current restrictions out and about, or, phoning people, people are telling me that lifelong Liberal voters are switching from no to yes or from no to undecided. And but what I would say to people in the wider independence movement is, talk of a kind of, the end of the independence movement that's for an insurgency, or for pushing for Plan B quite hard. I would say that sort of messaging goes down quite badly in Shetland, and we've got a lot of patient persuasion to do in Shetland before we can get the kind of robust and durable result that we want to get in that second independence referendum.
And just before I go to Effie, Tom, we saw quite recently a couple of councillors in Shetland talking about more autonomy for Shetland, and this was spun by unionist media as a loss for a future independent Scotland. I wonder, is that something that is an actual kind of movement now in Shetland, or is it maybe been a bit overblown? And how do you think that kind of support for decentralisation can feed into the independence movement?
Yeah, I mean, it is a real movement. There was a Shetland movement in the 70s, fielding parliamentary candidates. There is and has been, a portion of the Shetland population who think that Shetland should be fully independent, or at least have a sort of Faroese style arrangement. I think that is quite minority. If I remember rightly, it's in the mid 70%. People, see themselves as, to some degree, Scot. And I think the recent autonomy debate is more of a councillors' revolt than a people's revolt. It's been promoted, by the council rather than by grassroots. There are people in the grassroots who support it. It's been council led, and I think it stems from frustrations about the SIC fund settlement and Fair Ferry funding. And to be honest, I'm with Leslie Riddick on the need for reform of local government, and I studied in Norway and Sweden, and I know a bit about how local government works over there. And I think in an independent Scotland, we do need to be empowering local authority and fundamentally accountable government. Your representatives to be raising revenue and spending revenue, not just spending pocket that they receive from on high. So, at the moment, the Scottish Government gets its pocket money from Westminster, and the Shetland Islands Council gets most of its from Edinburgh. And I don't think that is the healthiest, most accountable system for our local democracies. And I'd also like to see community councils strengthened. The there's a lot to do in Scotland, and I think certainly I'm making the case in Shetland that to empowering Shetland.
Okay, we are having a wee bit of break up on the line, but I was going to turn to Effie anyway. Effie, what do you make of this this whole strategy that the Tories are supposedly considering? Do you think this is a sign of, as the story says, of panic in the Tory ranks?
I wouldn't trust them, Kenny. Of course, they're panicked. Absolutely. I don't think that support for Scottish independence. I mean, I've been looking through loads of research the other day. It has never historically been so high, with the exception possibly of the time of the Act of Union, where it is debatable whether actually most people were in favour. We believe that they were actually not in favour. But since then, and with the assimilation that happened historically, it has obviously declined. People in Scotland have accepted that they are part of the British state. Some of them have taken on the British identity. But over the last 50 years, what's been happening is Tory rule, which we have not voted for, in what was near 60 years now. And that, if you like, you can sort of, put a bit of veneer on that, given, the major years. Obviously what happened with Thatcher was unprecedented, but then, you had the Blair government, which again, Blair was a negotiator. He was able to somehow sugar the pill. The last 10 years have been unbearable, and there are large pockets of Scotland which have suffered immensely. Young children, people unable to feed their children. So the impact of Thatcherite Britain has come back to haunt these groups. Now, Brexit, I've said Brexit is a calamity, and I will say it again. Nothing will compare to Brexit. Even the Boris himself said the other day, we have to prepare for Brexit, which means, this is an ominous statement. He's saying, get ready to tighten your belts and forget about all the good stuff that you've been used to for the last 50 years. Now, yes, they are panicked. What I think was interesting was that idea of co-opting Brussels into, sort of accepting the idea that perhaps Scotland would not be a good candidate for EU membership. Now, that is beyond grotesque. We know that the EU has a specific policy on candidates. We know the criteria. They are rules-based. Scotland is today a member of the EU. So, and it more than fulfills the criteria. Now, there will have to be a process, and the process will have to be respected. And I'm not going to use phrases like fast-tracked or express or whatever it is. But as far as they are concerned, Scotland is a member of the EU, and one of the most interesting members of the EU. So that idea is a joke. But they are panicked. And to be honest with you, as I said in my introductory comment, I do suspect them. They have a lot of different tricks up their sleeves, and they know how to use them. So, we need to be prepared.
Well, we move on to our next story now. And Greater Manchester is facing a winter of real hardship, including business closures, job losses and homelessness, after the government dramatically walked out of talks over the implementation of England's strictest coronavirus regulations, Andy Burnham has said. Addressing the media in central Manchester, Greater Manchester's mayor condemned the government's game of poker approach to the negotiations, as Tier 3 measures looked set to be imposed on the region of 2.8 million people. Burnham said Greater Manchester's 10 council leaders had asked for £65 million from Boris Johnson's government, which he said was the bare minimum to prevent a winter of real hardship here. That is what we believe we needed to prevent poverty, to prevent hardship, to prevent homelessness. He said Robert Jenrick, the community's secretary, walked away from the talks at 2 p.m. after refusing to increase the government's offer of £60 million. Burnham said it had turned into a game of poker with people's lives, and the government actions amounted to a deliberate act of levelling down. So obviously that last comment related to the idea that Boris Johnson is going to level up across the north of England. What do you make of this dispute, Tom? Is this the kind of way that governments should be behaving during a pandemic?
I mean, I don't think it's a very edifying spectacle, and as in a lot of other areas, I think coronavirus is just shining a harsh light on existing disparities and dysfunctionalities in the UK political system. It's hard to know from the headlines what's actually going on in those negotiations, but it just seems like another example of the north of England being absolutely neglected by Westminster, and just those communities, and the Red Wall, which ironically has voted for Tories in the last election. It's going to be really interesting to see, how the Tories plan to hold on to those, because great promises were made, and if this Manchester escapade is anything to go by, then we're back to the status quo of Westminster and neglecting the north of England.
And Effie, this dispute over just a difference of £5 million seems a lot seems like a very little for the UK government to then just give up on the talks. And then we saw some reports that the final offer now is just £22 million. What do you make of that? And is this just vengeance from the UK government to say, well, if you're going to ask for that much, we're going to give you almost nothing at all?
As Burnham said, it's a game of poker. They're just playing with people's lives, and it's okay for us. Kenny sitting here. I'm actually sitting next to a heater, and I've got food on the table and everything else, and so do you. But imagine, as Burnham said in his very graphic example this afternoon, there are people whereby if you take 1/3 away from their income, they will starve. Young children, babies will suffer from malnutrition and starvation. Now, this is not a joke, and this has been going on for years. Manchester has been hit very, very badly, and I think, as you say, there is a little bit of vindictiveness going on here, because Burnham's been resisting it. They came out with a different figure, and then they reneged on that, which is what they're known for. The other interesting thing is that the protagonist in all this seems to be Robert Jenrick, Richard Desmond's bedmate. These are interesting personalities, and what's shocking about this is that we're talking about people's lives, we're talking about their health, we're talking about their well-being, and we're having these discussions right in the middle of a pandemic. This is like nothing we've ever seen in our lifetimes, actually for the last 100 years. And they're playing poker with people's lives. You don't need subtitles. I mean, it's shocking.
Well, speaking of the UK walking out of negotiations, we turn now to Brexit. And a frustrated EU and UK have both urged each other today to compromise to avoid a fast-approaching disruptive finale to the 5-year Brexit drama that would add to the economic pain from the coronavirus crisis. Failure to clinch a trade deal when the UK leaves the standstill transition period on December 31st would sow chaos through supply chains and undermine Europe's economy, as it already sees jobs and businesses damaged by the COVID-19 pandemic. After an EU demand for concessions, Prime Minister Boris Johnson broke off talks and said it was time to prepare for a no-deal Brexit. The EU has since offered to intensify talks and open discussions on legal texts of a draft deal, but the UK maintains there is no basis to resume discussions without a fundamental change in approach. So, Tom, this most recent breakdown in this discussion between the two parties, it does look like either a very extreme case of brinkmanship or we've reached the end of the road. Which do you think this is?
Yeah, I'd put some money on it if I knew, but I think fundamentally the Tories are comfortable with the no-deal Brexit. I don't know if they're quite stupid enough to make that their goal. I imagine there's an element of brinksmanship, and they'd quite like to get a sort of face-saving deal out of the EU. But these are capitalists. I think Pete Wishart was quite right to say that this is an act of disaster Toryism. If there is a real disaster, economic disaster in the UK, and there's pandemonium, that is when generally these sorts of neoliberal capitalists rush through the kind of sweeping reforms that they've been wanting to do to the UK for years. And, my wife's from Chile, the kind of sweeping reforms of the economy that they call it the Chile experiment of neoliberalism. And I think, the people who Brexit are the sorts of people who want to entirely deregulate the economy and open up vast swathes of public sector operations, and and so I think it's a case of delusions a grand part of the UK. I think they believe at least some of their own rhetoric about Brexit Britain rising again and ruling the waves, and it's sort of a post-imperial hangover that they have this delusion that they're in a bigger position of strength than they actually are, faced by a coalition of 27 member states who more or less agree.
So Effie, coming to you on this, it seemed as though one of the big stumbling points was the EU had not put in their summit communique at the end of last week that they wanted to intensify talks. That seemed to have bothered the UK government. The EU has said now it is willing to intensify talks. Why do you think that makes such a difference, or is that just a fig leaf for the UK to use to walk away with some sort of cover?
Of course, it doesn't make a difference to any a person who is bound by logic and reason. But if you are committed to reading The Sun and the Daily Mail, it will make a huge big difference to you. And this is who they're talking to, Kenny. They're talking to their base. They're not talking to you or I or whoever it may be. In fact, they're actually talking to a very targeted minority who are in a sort of a cult-like relationship to them. No one is going to believe any of this. 27 countries. This is the most coveted trading cultural bloc in the world. Now, you have had these statements from the Prime Minister of Australia, from people in Canada, from Japan. All of these countries seek to make deals and connections with the European Union. No one in their right mind would seek to take themselves out of that structure and then be looking to revive Victorian Britain, because they won't. What will happen is a total pandemonium, and some people will walk away from this as billionaires. They probably already have that in the bank, but it will intensify. For example, what was very interesting over the last couple of weeks, I think, is the what is related to data protection and who owns data. And we've seen this with the Serco deals and with the whole data harvesting, health, DNA data and all of that. Now, this is very heavily protected by the EU. Coming out of the EU is going to open up all these so-called possibilities to Cummings and his friends to, do whatever they like with it, with America or themselves, or whoever it may be. Now, I believe there will be a deal, but the deal will be deplorable. And I think it will be probably Act 6 of the Boris drama just before Christmas. And obviously, it will bear no relation to life as we know it today, but there will be something that they can feed to their readers and their supporters, and literally just for the sake of being able to get food through and the lorries and things like that. But life will change, and it will be a dramatic negative change.
Well, we will, of course, keep an eye on those negotiations if and when they resume. But we move on now, and the UK government will help to fund trials using a manufactured COVID-19 virus to deliberately infect young healthy volunteers with the hope of accelerating the development of vaccines against it. The government said today it will invest £33.6 million in the so-called human challenge trials in partnership with Imperial College London, laboratory and trial services company hVivo, and the Royal Free London NHS Foundation Trust. If approved by regulators and an ethics committee, the studies will start in January with results expected by May 2021, the government said. Using controlled doses of virus, the aim of the research team will initially be to discover the smallest amount of virus it takes to cause the COVID-19 infection in small groups of healthy young people aged between 18 and 30 who are at the lowest risk of harm, the scientists leading the studies said in a briefing. Up to 90 volunteers could be involved at the initial stages, they said, and the virus to be used will be manufactured in labs at London's Great Ormond Street Hospital. So, Effie, I think first question on this, what do you make of the ethical questions around using healthy volunteers and deliberately infecting them with the virus when we still don't have a viable treatment?
Precisely. I'm actually going through an ethics approval procedure just now for a project that I'm involved in, and I can absolutely verify that ethics is a huge part of. Obviously, I'm in social science. I'm not in medicine, but more so in medicine. The moment I'm not an epidemiologist and I'm not a doctor, a medical doctor, but I will say this: the moment I read the article, my very first question was, "Is this going to go through ethics committee?" I don't know. I don't obviously understand the minutiae of the genetic coding and who they're intending to infect. But as you said, and as the World Health Organization has said repeatedly, we do not know enough about the virus as the situation stands at the moment. Now, how this will affect ethics decisions, again, I don't know, but I would be inclined to think that they might have difficulty getting approval for something like this, especially given that the virus has mutated. The virus, as is natural for viruses, they do that. And also, saying that a specific group of the demographic is not severely affected, that may be the medical profiling that they present at the moment in percentage points. But we have had some very, very serious cases of very healthy young people, especially with long COVID. So 6-8 months after COVID, they present with various symptoms affecting the heart, the hemoglobin, the other areas of the body, the kidneys and what have you. So it's concerning. I don't know where this is going, and I don't understand why this is necessary right now. Perhaps someone might be able to enlighten us.
And Tom, just quickly, assuming this does pass an ethics committee, it could be some very interesting research, couldn't it?
Yeah, I mean, I can understand why they're doing it. I think I'm right in saying there's never been a vaccine for a coronavirus, like any other version of coronavirus. So, and if there's no vaccine in sight, then we're in serious trouble. So I can understand them wanting to pursue all options. Assuming it gets past ethics committee, there's horror stories from all types of medical trials, but it's an essential part of the development process. So I can understand why they're trying to do it, but I share the concerns about long COVID and also, having to isolate these people from their families and the ethics of it. But I'm sure maybe my confidence is misplaced, but I imagine it will be subject to a rigorous ethics assessment. Yeah, but you never know with these guys.
Yeah, well, we certainly hope so. And if we do hear any more about that as the story develops, we will bring it to you. But we move on now to Malta, and a company owned by Daphne Caruana Galizia murder suspect Jorgen Fenech received a €2.3 million payment from a firm run out of Switzerland with links to Azerbaijan, according to a report in the Times of Malta. The payment was made to Fenech's 17 Black on November 24, 2015 by Crowbar Holdings, a company registered in the British Virgin Islands, but which was administered from Switzerland. Investigations by the Daphne Project, an international journalistic collaboration which includes the Times of Malta, shows that Swiss Azeri citizen Mariam Almazadi, who is SOCAR's Trading's CEO, used to be a director of Crowbar Holdings, though she resigned in June 2015 prior to the transaction in question. SOCAR Trading is one of the partners in the Electrogas power station, of which Fenwick used to be a director. Almazadi declined to comment when contacted by Daphne Project's Swiss partners, Tamedia. Crowbar was owned by Azeri entrepreneur Rovshan Tamrazov, who also owns a Swiss oil trading company called Maddox. Almazadi spent 2 years as Maddox's CEO before moving on to SOCAR Trading in 2018. Now, obviously, there's a lot of detail here that our viewers won't be very familiar with. Effie, some people will have watched our show on Friday where we looked into the Daphne Caruana Galizia case. Jorgen Fenwick, of course, is accused of masterminding that, as well as being part of a whole web of other corruption involving this electrogas plant and potentially some bribery to politicians and whatnot. I wonder what you make of just the fact that we're exposing all of this corruption in an EU democracy, a country where the rule of law should be protected and where EU partners should be kind of keeping an eye on things and helping to make sure that countries are running in a transparent and democratic way. What do you make of how this story has emerged particularly since Daphne's murder?
To be honest with you, I find this incredibly disturbing in terms of the level of corruption. But then again, this isn't something that is unknown to any single individual or country. If you go through the modern history, I mean, forgetting about the older times, but, modern history shows us that there is a huge amount of state corruption, regardless where you look. Tom just mentioned the Scandinavian countries. Now, they are probably the least affected by this, but I have thought about this in the wider context of European policy, if you like. Now, the European Union was not founded in its founding principles. This was not part of what, if you like, it was constituted for. So I understand the delay or the difficulty or the lack of agility in dealing with situations like this. We've had comparable things happen, for example, in Poland. We've had comparable things happen in Hungary. And who would have, thought that we're getting comparable things happening in Westminster, with serious levels of corruption. So the problem is that the European structures are made in a way as to not interfere with national sovereignty unless this encroaches on a wider European question. This is how it was made. However, I know that there is a lot of disquiet in Brussels at the moment to do with Malta, to do with Poland, to do with Hungary, to do with Catalonia, and also to do with the UK at the moment. So I'm expecting to see over the next 5 years quite rapid developments in relation to national corruption at national levels, if you like.
Yeah, well, we will look forward to that. We move on now, though, and Russia has authorised its defence ministry to open an office in Serbia, a government document showed, as Moscow pushes to expand military ties with its traditional Balkan ally, even as Belgrade seeks to join the European Union. Serbia last month suspended military drills with foreign troops for 6 months, citing pressure from the EU to withdraw from joint exercises with Russia and Belarus. The Russian government order, dated October 15th and signed by Prime Minister Mikhail Mishustin, said the head of the proposed office would assist in resolving military and technical questions over Russian-Serbian cooperation. The agreement, once signed by both parties, would give the Russian official in Serbia the right to visit Serbian divisions that use Russian weapons and military equipment, provided that prior notice and consent were given. In a short statement today, Serbia's defence ministry said a legal procedure that precedes the concluding of the agreement had already been launched. Serbia, whose military mainly uses ex-Soviet weapons technology, has procured MiG-29 fighter jets, as well as Mi-35 helicopter gunships, T-72 tanks, and armoured personnel carriers from Russia in recent years. So Tom, coming to you on this, Serbian nationalism has been a consistent problem in that part of the world. Russia has been a consistent ally of Serbian nationalists and perhaps enabling some of their more extreme actions. How much does this worry you that Serbia is trying to join the EU while it's strengthening defence arrangements with Russia?
Yeah, I mean, it shows the continued rise of Russia as well. And, Russia's a totalitarian state, led and fed by oligarchs. There's a link to the Malta story here, which is just the sheer power of these billionaires and the totalitarian state of Russia that they're linked to. It's a worrying trend, and I think we in the EU we need to get our own house in order. The EU needs reform, but I think if you look around the world, it's hard to see a better example of how a continent can organize itself than the EU at the moment. I certainly don't think we want to be copying Russia, America, or China's example. So if Serbia is to be let in, I think we need to hold them to appropriate standards. And yeah, I think on Hungary and Poland, the EU has not been strong enough in pushing back at this kind of right-wing populism and ethnic nationalism, essentially, which is backed by the malevolent force of Russia in the region. So we need to stand firm on that and accept, that the EU is not perfect, but that European solidarity is the best kind of bulwark against these forces.
Yeah, absolutely. And we come back to Westminster now, and the House of Commons last night rejected a series of amendments from the House of Lords to the Immigration and Social Security Coordination EU Withdrawal Bill, which is set to end freedom of movement and begin to establish a fully independent immigration policy for the UK after the end of the Brexit transition. Amendments had been proposed to help keep families together and to strengthen rights for asylum seekers and refugees, as well as those trafficked to the UK as slaves, but the Tory government rejected them all. The SNP's Shadow Immigration Minister Stuart MacDonald MP said, "The Tories have yet again let Scotland down by voting against the amendments made in the House of Lords. They have ignored the calls of MPs and organisations across the UK and have failed to follow through on their commitment to create an immigration system that would work for all parts of the UK. These amendments would have kept families together, protected the care sector, supported some of the most vulnerable groups in society, including children, asylum seekers and victims of modern slavery, and prevented another Windrush generation." So, Effie, can I come to you first on this? One of these amendments that really jumped out at me was made by Lord McCall. This was an amendment that would have given 12 months leave to remain for victims of slavery, people who had been trafficked to the UK, and that would also give them recourse to public funds. That amendment was rejected, which means that once somebody is effectively rescued from slavery in the UK, they will then become an illegal immigrant with no recourse to public funds and will be effectively eligible for deportation immediately. How is this? How is it possible that the Tories have just become so resistant to human rights?
It's very hard for me to talk about this, Kenny, because this is my area of research. I have been researching exile for some years now, as you know, under the UNESCO chair umbrella. at Glasgow Uni, and I have heard some pretty horrific stories firsthand when it comes to these things. We have also collectively experienced the horror story of Mercy Baguma and her son, Mercy having been found dead in Glasgow recently next to her malnourished child. What happens is when we get the televisual aspect of these cases, it almost sits in our consciousness as a one-off thing. Oh, remember Mercy. The problem is that there are millions of these cases of persecution, slavery, torture, and the issue is that these people will never find safety, will never cross the oceans to get here. The very few people that do, and may I also stress, the British Empire are answerable for most of these ills that are still affecting people in the southern hemisphere and all over the world. So this is not. You can't, as you know, as the Home Office. It's a bit grotesque to say that we can wash our hands and decide who comes and who goes. And also the other thing is the rhetoric of amalgamating asylum seekers with immigrants. So people who, for some reason, come here on a work contract or whatever, and they seek some sort of security or arrangements for their health covering and all that stuff. And to mix that up and say that asylum seekers and people who turn up as refugees, having crossed oceans, having sometimes, found themselves in dinghies or swum, this is absolutely horrific. Now, when did it happen? When the United Kingdom divorced itself from human rights? I'm not going to be able to cover it in 30 seconds. I'm going to say that the United Kingdom has had waves of compassion, if you like. So, you've had specific people, and amongst them, some amazing English constitutional lawyers. Now, the European Convention for Human Rights was drafted by an Englishman. And these were very enlightened people who actually understood the idea of human rights and took responsibility for who they were and what needed to be done as a result of the Second World War. What's happened in the meanwhile? Wow, give me an hour, give me a week. I'm not going to be able to tell you what happened. This is Trumpian England. This is what it is. But also, let's not forget, Rupert Murdoch with his dirty press. They have a lot to answer for in this horror. They feed them. Then they have the people who celebrate these achievements of people dying and being returned to countries where they will be tortured and enslaved. The rejection of the amendment was no news to me. I knew this was going to happen. But what we need in an independent Scotland, which I'd like to believe is going to happen very, very soon, is the very first thing we need to think about is obviously Scottish people's well-being, but also our immigration policy. I'd say that should be right up there.
Absolutely. Well, speaking of well-being of people in Scotland, we come back to Scotland, and a £30 million package of funding is being made available to local authorities to support people facing financial hardship as a result of the coronavirus, including money to provide free school meals over the school holidays. Local authorities will be given flexibility to use £20 million previously held in reserve for the Scottish Welfare Fund to support people in their communities. A further £10 million has been made available so councils can continue providing free school meals through the winter breaks, with future funding confirmed to extend support over Easter. So Tom, this is good news, isn't it?
Yeah, I think, the Scottish Government's working with one hand tied behind its back, but they're doing what you can, and this is just the most recent example of it. And I think the free school meals thing especially, you hear these horror stories about kids, the only decent meal they're getting is at school. So I think the footballer Marcus, is it Radford?
Marcus Rashford, yeah.
I think he's done incredibly well to put a spotlight on that. It's just amazing to see that the Tories belatedly trying to get on the free school meals bandwagon, having been against that sort of thing for so long. I hope we'll see Douglas Ross pushing for free school meals in Westminster for the whole of the UK as well, now that he's on board with the plan in Scotland.
Yeah. And Effie, I mean, as Tom says, the Scottish Government has been working with one hand tied behind its back, but it has done a lot, hasn't it?
It has, it has, and I can speak first-hand experience here. My daughter, she's fortunate enough that within her year there aren't any specific examples of this. But however, there is one girl that she's very, very close to, and we're talking now about near teenagers now, and she is dependent on that one school meal. And we talk about this, and it's brought it so close to my heart. This is a huge issue, and obviously through Glasgow University as well, I've been heavily involved in the attainment gap, which is to do with education. But I can tell you that poverty has played a huge part in a large part of the Scottish demographic feeling the way they feel, issues to do still with alcoholism, issues to do with addiction. Now, this is going to make a huge, big difference. I'm so delighted to hear about this. And I know it's one meal, but to some people, as Tom said, it's their one meal a day, and it's of incredible importance. So well done.
Yeah. And that seems like an excellent place to end. We are very nearly out of time after all. So I'd like to thank very much Tom Will and Effie Samara for joining us. It's been a pleasure hearing from both of you. And thank you to you at home for joining us as well. There would be no point in making the shows at all if we didn't have you here. So thank you very much. We do have to ask, if you're able to support Broadcasting Scotland, we would appreciate it very much if you go to broadcastingscotland.scot/register. Sign up there as a supporter, and your £5 a month is what helps us to keep building a better broadcaster for Scotland. If you're not able to support us financially, we do absolutely understand. The shows will always be free to view online, but you can still make a big difference by following us on Twitter at BroadcastScot, by liking our Facebook page, and by subscribing to our YouTube channel and clicking the bell icon there to make sure you get updated when we release a new video. All of that helps us in themselves just by helping us with the algorithm. But the more you share them makes a big difference as well. Your word of mouth is the best way for us to build an audience. So do please let people know why you support Broadcasting Scotland. And finally, if you'd like to actually get involved in building a better broadcaster for Scotland, then we do have lots of opportunities. Many of you will have seen Sam taking over on the show last night. That was because Gordon wasn't available, and we don't have regular cover for people to take holidays. So if you're interested in getting involved either in front of the camera or behind the camera, then do please get in touch with us. We have lots of opportunities here. We can provide training, we can provide all kinds of support. Just let us know if you'd like to get involved, and we will figure out how to make that happen. But that is absolutely all we have time for tonight. I will be back again tomorrow. I am not Gordon Ross. I will be back tomorrow. That's me. So once again, thank you very much to Effie and to Tom. Thank you for joining us, and have a great evening. Good night. Hooray.